bugs on the iPhone than it is on a Mac, for example. So what listens on the server side of the iPhone? Well, I already mentioned MDNS responders there, and it's just like the desktop, so it's sitting on 5353. And as you might know, MDNS responder is used to set up, to configure devices without having to do anything so automatically. So it's just listening, and if it gets one of these packets, it knows I see a printer or whatever. It also has something the desktop doesn't have. It has universal plug-and-play listening, and it's listening all the time, but this port's used when you're doing syncing. And then it's got some other process, and I don't know what it is, but it binds to some different port every time, so it must be like initiating a connection. I don't know, but that's always there, and I don't know what it is, mostly because this is one of the drawbacks of doing this embedded work, is you don't have all of the tools you would normally have. Like on my desktop, I run LSOF, for example, but they don't have that for iPhone, and I'm too lazy to build it. So I don't know what that is, but there's some other process you could nail remotely. Obviously, you still got the other stuff like the TCP/IP stack, the wireless stack, Bluetooth stacks. So there's other code you could hit remotely, but there's not much, right? So there isn't much on a desktop Mac, and there's just as little, actually a little more, I guess, on the iPhone. But still, it's going to be tough to just remotely nail iPhones. If you run Nmap against it, Nmap knows what it is, and it can detect it. All right, what about the client side? Well, just like on the desktop, there's a lot more available on the client side. So you've basically got mobile versions of a lot of the same programs you would have on the desktop. So there's mobile Safari, mobile Mail, mobile Music Player, mobile SMS, which is their text messaging application, mobile Slideshow, which is their basically iPhoto for the iPhone. And if you want to find anything else, just look in applications/mobile. And of course, the other thing you have on the client side is anything that they were stupid enough to download from the App Store, right? So, you could imagine, finding writing some game, getting it published on the App Store, and knowing that there was a bug in it that you put there or something. And whenever anyone downloads it, then you can, not only do you get their IP address maybe because they have to call out to you for something, but then you just nail them. Right, so I mentioned that it's a smaller text server. So what exactly do I mean? Well. So there's a lot of files. So basically, the biggest difference is there's no QuickTime on an iPhone. So like all the hundreds of file formats that your Mac can handle because it has QuickTime, iPhone can't. It also doesn't have Java or Flash. So those are the three big things. So if you can find a bug on a Mac that isn't QuickTime, Flash, or Java, then it's probably going to work on iPhone. But otherwise, you're out of luck. So like I say here, so there's some files that work on Safari, but not on mobile Safari. So SVG is one that's one's not in QuickTime, but it's just not compiled into mobile Safari. JP2 is a QuickTime file format, and so on. But interestingly, there's some file formats that will work on mobile Safari, but not the real Safari. And examples of that are the Microsoft format. So on mobile Safari, you can actually surf to a page that has a .doc, and it'll render it for you. But in real Safari, it won't. It'll try to download it. Besides Safari, you got other applications that are phone specific that you get on the iPhone. So you get it has to be able to handle SMS messages, for example. So if you could find a bug there, that would be a way in. And like I said, so Apple always says that, oh yes, iPhone is so different. Just because you find a bug, it's not going to be on the iPhone. Well, they're wrong. It's true that if you find a bug on, like I described, that isn't QuickTime and it isn't Flash or Java, it's going to be on the iPhone. And there's actually, after the Pwnome contest, I told, so this was, I found a bug in the JavaScript engine, and I got into Safari with it, and they asked me, they said, so is this bug, and I reported it to Apple, like a good guy. And I said, is this bug on iPhone too? And I said, I don't know, but I imagine it is. And I was out of the country, and I didn't want to use my phone because I didn't have the international plan. So they just left it at that, and it turns out that they were convinced it wasn't in it, even though, like I described it, it is. So like months later, I called them, or I told someone, I was like, I can't believe they haven't fixed this bug yet, right? Some reporter. I was like, they've known about this bug for 2 months, they haven't fixed it. And like I said, it turns out they didn't believe that it was there, and it was. So don't trust Apple. Trust security researchers. Okay. So my favorite way to find bugs is fuzzing. So what about fuzzing for iPhone? Well, if you can find what Safari and mobile Safari have in common, you can just fuzz the desktop version of Safari and find all the bugs that way. And then those bugs will translate over to iPhone. So of the 2 exploits I guess I've written for iPhone, so I didn't find either of those on the iPhone. I found those on the desktop, and then I just wrote them for the iPhone. So like I say, so crashes in Safari should crash mobile Safari. What about on the phone? So what if you want to find a bug in SMS, or you want to find a bug in Microsoft Word, or not, in the mobile Safari handling of Microsoft Word? Well, there you're going to have to do it on the phone. So there, you can actually fuzz on the phone. It's just slower and sort of a pain. Also, I'll go into it, but it's harder to launch things from the command line there because of the whole springboard. And also, one other option is you can fuzz on the emulator. So if you signed up for the SDK, you'll get an emulator, and you can actually fuzz on there, and it's a lot easier. And that's actually how I found, so you may know I found this Android G1 phone bug last week. And I found that on the emulator, and I actually wrote the exploit on the emulator. And then when I got the phone, the exploit just worked without change. So emulators are cool for that. Okay, so how do you launch an application, a GUI application on the iPhone from the command line? It's actually not as trivial as you would think. So the window manager springboard, it sits there and listens on UDP port 30,000. And it's pretty cool. So the way that it works is you send it 256 bytes that contains the application identifier for the application that you care about. And you can get that from the info.plist file. And then Springboard will just launch that application. So the question is, so there's this port that you just send it what you want to run, and it runs it. And can you use that? It only listens on the local interface, though. So the question is, can you somehow use that to your advantage? I don't know. If Flash was on there, you could through the browser talk to that port, but I don't know if there's any way you can take advantage of that. But it's interesting. So here's some C code that will launch, in this case, mobile Safari from the command line. So all it does is send a packet like I described to that port. And the application identifier in this case is com.apple.mobile Safari. So you compile this, run it from the command line, and it'll launch Safari. Okay, so if you've ever seen any of my fuzzing talks, I always talk about how I love Crash Reporter, because it basically automatically finds when any of your programs crashes and gives you the crash dump for it. Well, there's Crash Reporter on iPhone too. It doesn't have the cool GUI that pops up and makes you feel all proud when you find a bug, but otherwise it's basically the same. So there's these 2 directories that I list here where the crash dumps will show up. One for if your program is running as the mobile user, which most things that you care about are, and then ones that are owned by root. These crash reports are plist files, which are the fancy Mac way to store data. And there's links in these directories that always point to the latest crash, and you can see what those look like. Okay, so then how do you fuzz? Well, one way you can do it, and I'll show you this, although it's going to be kind of hard to show you on my phone, but I'll try. So you can make an HTTP server that just serves a page and forces the browser to meta refresh every second to a different image or a different doc file or whatever you want. And then eventually, so that works great until the browser crashes, which is going to happen pretty soon. And then what you want to do is have the web server smart enough that if it hasn't had anyone connect to it in a while, it goes off, SSHs into the phone and launches Safari again. So I'll show you that real quick here. I got to find the right phone. You're not really going to be able to see anything hardly, but I swear it'll be worth the minute it takes me to do it. So I have such a server and I have a lot of code and stuff in this talk. So if there's if you want any of this stuff, just give me an email and I'll send it to you. Oops. Oh, yeah. Sorry about this. Okay. Okay, so you probably can't see this, but if you look super close, so if you see the little blue bar going choo choo choo, that's it fuzzing. So like every second it's getting a different image, and eventually it's going to go away. And you can see like this nasty crack I have on my phone maybe. But anyway, so that's fuzzing on the iPhone. It's not the greatest demo. There's better ones, trust me. I'll show you like a cool demo by the end. That one's pretty lame. Okay, so that's how you find bugs, right? Is you fuzz either your desktop or the iPhone, and eventually you find a crash and stuff. So what about writing the exploit? Well, the very first iPhone exploit that I wrote was like 2 weeks after the phone came out. And back then, like people like to tell stories about how hard they had it when they were kids. Well, that's how it is for me. Like back then, it was like really hard. So back then, the only thing that I had Crash Reporter, but the only way you could get files off it was if you would like power off the phone and plug it into your computer. So it wasn't like real easy. Again, you could access the file system, but not when the phone was on. I had a cross compiler for ARM, but it wasn't like super great. It wouldn't work all the time for the iPhone. And iDepro was really bad, so it was really hard to write exploits back then. So you basically had no way to actively debug what was going on the phone. You could just send in data and then see what the crash report was. And every time you did that, it took like 5 minutes. But it was possible, and we exploited it, so that was cool. Now, though, life is a lot easier. So you have SSH, you have GDB, so you can just run GDB right on the phone. You have GCC. iDepro works like really well with it now. So basically, you have no one should ever complain about writing iPhone exploits now. It's easy compared to how it used to be. But what are some problems that you run into? So say you have a Safari exploit and you want to port it over to iPhone. What kind of things can you run into? Well, one thing is there's going to be a lot more resource limitations on iPhone, and this is what happened with. I told you this story earlier about how Apple, claimed that bug I sent them wasn't vulnerable on the iPhone, and it was because of this resource limitation. So I wrote the exploit for Safari, and so I malloc like a ton of buffers and do all this other stuff. And so when they ran the exploit, it exhausted the iPhone's memory and just aborted. So it never even got to the line that had the bad code in it, right? All it was doing was mallocing buffers and stuff. And so like, oh, it didn't crash, it's not vulnerable. Well, they weren't so smart. So what really happened was I just needed to change the exploit not to malloc so much stuff, and then it worked. So you have to be careful of resource limitations on the iPhone. You have bandwidth considerations, so maybe your exploit works great, on the wireless network you're on, but as soon as you're doing it over the cellular network, maybe it's too slow and you have some timing issue, so you have to worry about that. The biggest issue is your payload is going to have to be a lot different. So I already mentioned that there's no bin sh. So what's shellcode at that point, right? There's no shell. So you have to do something creative, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that. This is something I just learned pretty recently. So on the latest versions of iPhone, the heap is not executable. So actually, the iPhone is like way more secure than the desktop computer at this point, which is blew me away. So it's actually much harder now to write iPhone exploits than to write regular Mac OS X exploits. But this is like documented nowhere. It's just like a secret change they made and didn't tell anybody, but it's true. Okay, so now let me talk a little bit about this like feng shui stuff I like to talk about. It's a really cool way to exploit heap overflows, and especially in WebKit, which is the browser that's on iPhone. And then I'll talk about an actual exploit, and I'll demo one. All right, so heap feng shui was originally thought up by Soderov. He did it for Windows. And the idea behind it is, and then I just ported his idea over to Mac. The idea is that the heap is like totally unpredictable. So Depending on where the browser's been, the heap could be in like all sorts of crazy configurations. So how many pages did the guy go to? How